NBC is the current king of sitcoms. They have been pumping out critical hits and fan favorites for decades now, and continue to innovate and define what a sitcom is. I recently finished watching The Good Place, and when the last scene concluded and the screen cut to black, I couldn't help but think to myself, damn, NBC managed to pull it off again. They have been incredibly effective at telling a complete story with a satisfying ending over the years. And this got me thinking, and inspired me to take a deeper look into what has made some of their sitcoms so successful. You're probably now thinking of some of your own favorite NBC sitcoms, such as The Office, Scrubs, Cheers, 30 Rock, etc. The list goes on. And these are all examples of great sitcoms put out by NBC, and proof of how well they have handled sitcoms over the years. But in my opinion, the best sitcoms they have ever put out are Community, Parks and Rec, and The Good Place. The reason these shows stand out to me as the best is because of how well they handle three core things: the characters, the world, and the ending. And it's these three things combined that make these shows the most unique, interesting, and fun shows to watch. So allow me to dive in and attempt to break down what makes these shows resonate so well with fans and critics alike. We begin at the end of the last decade, where a small town in Indiana sets the stage for Parks and Rec.
Go! Go! Punk-ass book jockey!
When this show first aired in 2009, it faced some tough competition. Scrubs still had another year on the air, The Office and How I Met Your Mother still had a couple years to go, Modern Family had also just begun, and The Big Bang Theory was hitting its stride. And after season 1 finished, things were uncertain for the show. The reviews were mixed at best, with many saying the show was an Office impersonator and that it didn't have an identity of its own. But despite this, there was enough there for NBC to renew it for a second season, and that's when everything began to fall into place. This turnaround in quality all began with the characters, which were heavily criticized in Season 1 for being boring and one-dimensional. Season 2 took these characters and wrote them in the right direction, while leaving room for the actors to give the characters their own unique personalities. Look no further than Andy Dwyer as the perfect example of this. Andy was never meant to be a reoccurring character on the show, but the showrunners loved Chris Pratt's portrayal of him so much that they kept him on the ensemble, and he quickly became a favorite among fans. But he was just part of a unique dynamic and set of characters that complemented each other in a way that, in my opinion, is the best character dynamic of any sitcom to date. The character development in this show is unrivaled, and while other shows did and do it well, this show took it to a whole other level. By the time the series ends, we can see a clear progression amongst all 10 main characters. That is an incredible feat, especially given that most shows struggle to handle just half as many characters as that. And I think a large part of what made this possible is what I consider a character of its own: the world Parks and Rec is set in. We always know where we are when watching this show. Even when characters travel outside the town of Pawnee, we are well aware that those characters are from Pawnee, a small town in Indiana with quirky citizens and real-life problems we can all relate to. It's grounded and makes us feel like Pawnee is real, but more importantly, that the characters actually exist and live there. And even though most of us have never worked in government before, we can connect with the situation through the characters, as they all react differently to the same environment, as a group of people naturally would. This makes the setting not just an excuse for all the characters to be together, but it creates a natural point of contention amongst them all. Leslie loves government and loves working there. Ron hates it but does what he has to do. April would rather be anywhere else but can't go. Andy is just happy to have a job and be with people, and Ben is trying to move on from his past government failures. No matter what is happening in the show, it is always affected by the world they are in. The characters and events are shaped around this world, as opposed to the world being shaped around these characters. And that brings us to the end of the show. After all these characters have fully developed and created their own identities and stories, the show wraps it all up in what is widely considered as one of the best series finales of all time. It honestly feels impossible to explain, because you just need to experience the show for yourself to truly understand the impact of the ending. The finale wraps up these characters in such a perfect way, it completely satisfies the journey you just went on with them. And in the most poetic way possible, they all come together one last time, before saying goodbye to pursue their own life goals. One of the most crucial aspects of the final season was that the show was ended by the creators on purpose. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, showrunner Michael Schur said, "At the beginning of season 6, Amy and I started talking. Like, What's our endgame here? We both felt like all we really cared about was that we wanted to be the people who ended the show when we wanted to end it, ideally if that were possible, and it felt like the time to do that would be at the end of season 7. This is a situation that rarely happens with shows. There are plenty of examples of shows running their course and jumping the shark. Ending the show on their own terms prevented the show from becoming stale and stretched for ideas. It gave the creators the opportunity to finish the show the way they best saw fit, and they made the best of it. Around the same time Parks and Rec was finishing up, so was another NBC sitcom, the cult favorite, Community.
We're gonna fly to school each morning. We're gonna smile the entire time.
This is a lesser known show, and I think one of the most underrated shows of all time. It was created by Dan Harmon, and also premiered in 2009. If you don't know anything about it, it's in your best interest to stop watching this and to go watch that instead. It is one of the most creative and unique shows of all time. The show revolves around a group of community college misfits that form a study group, and what occurs next can only be described as chaotic genius. Dan Harmon took this show in a direction untraditional to standard sitcoms. The show doesn't adhere to one genre or linear story throughout. Instead, each episode has its own identity, its own story, genre, and theme, all contained within its 22-minute runtime. This meant one week you could be watching a post-apocalyptic paintball thriller, and the next you could be watching a mobster story about cafeteria chicken. It's what made the show exciting, not knowing what kind of wild ride you'd be taken for the next week, and it gave the show a reputation as the most creative show on television. But of course, this kind of approach wouldn't be possible without the right cast of characters. The main ensemble consists of a disgraced lawyer, a jock stuck in his high school years, an ex-Adderall addict, a middle-aged mother, a crass old man, and the movie/TV show-loving enigma, Abed. These vastly different types of characters are what allowed the absurd scenarios to play out in a believable way. And even though the episodes are rarely connected, the characters naturally grow throughout each one, and their progression is clear as the show moves forward. The best example of this is Troy and Abed's relationship. These two were fan favorites because of the chemistry they shared on screen. What at first seemed like polar opposite characters soon grew into two of the best friends we've seen on a television show. Seriously, their energy is infectious. If you have ever heard someone rapping about the biblioteca, just know that's because of these two. All the characters in the show grow and interact in a way that can only be done with this type of show and with this type of world. The world of Community is simple on the surface. It takes place at a community college. Right off the bat, a lot of people can relate to the setting, because there's a shared stigma and stereotype around community colleges, and the show leans into that. But most importantly, just like a good character, the world in which they are in serves an important role in the story. It not only allows for such an odd assortment of characters, but it also places all of them on the same level playing field. All these characters are losers. Jeff was a very successful lawyer who fell from grace. He is a loser. Troy was the coolest guy in high school, but is now just another community college student. Troy is a loser. If the setting were different, this would have to be blatantly explained to us. But since the world in which these characters are in is already universally known as a loser place, the moment we see all of our characters there, we immediately know that they are all losers. Simply by placing them in that environment, we have valuable information that connects a cast of characters that otherwise seem unequivocally different. We don't know exactly what makes them losers yet, but that's what the show reveals to us through its clever episode structures. And it's this setting, this world, that is constantly at the center of every episode. Now, before I talk about the ending of the series, I unfortunately have to bring up the bumps in the road along the way, because this show was anywhere but perfect behind the scenes. There were issues with cast members, specifically Chevy Chase, and this resulted in him leaving the show, and also played a part in Donald Glover's departure. There was also the 4th season of the show, which saw creator Dan Harmon replaced. That season was so poorly received that when Dan Harmon came back to direct the next season, he had characters refer to it in the show as the gas leak year. And then NBC canceled the show altogether after season 5, only for Yahoo to swoop in and save the sitcom for one last season. It wasn't pretty, but it makes the ending that much more impressive. By the time we reached the final episode, 3 main characters had already left the show. While these departures were for reasons beyond the show, they worked into the overarching theme of the show: growth and self-actualization. When the series began, all of these characters were quite literally trapped. None of them wanted to be at the community college, but all had to due to circumstances unique to each individual. Escaping the college and moving on in life was the underlying motivation for all of the characters throughout the show, and that was not truer than for main character Jeff. At the beginning, he was the most adamant about getting out. He only hung out with the others for personal gain and viewed their company as no more than another tribulation of community college. But by the end of the series, it was Jeff who was most reluctant to go. We got to see him grow attached to these characters, mainly through his actions, and it was the last episode where he truly expresses his feelings out loud. And while it's hard for him to watch two more of his friends leave, he understands that it is what is best for them. He is finally at peace with where he is in life. And for a show that was always on the edge of cancellation and never sure what was to come the next year, this finale truly delivered an ending that gave fans the closure they needed, for characters that are some of the most open-ended in television history. And so, the show that started alongside Parks and Rec also ended alongside it in 2015. And the sitcom baton was handed off yet again, a little over a year later on September 16th, 2016, when the first episode of a game-changing sitcom aired called The Good Place.
Utilitarian worldview! Okay, so, what did we learn?
This show caused a major buzz when it aired, mostly because of its original and odd premise, a sitcom that takes place in the afterlife. It was created by Michael Schur, whose name should sound very familiar at this point. He was one of the creators of the aforementioned Parks and Rec, as well as Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and he was also a producer on The Office. He had a ton of experience going into The Good Place, and it shows. One of the most impressive things to me about the show is that it had a clear roadmap of where it wanted to go, and it stuck to it flawlessly. What made it so fun to watch for me, and I'm sure for others, is that each episode had purpose. Each 22-minute slot added to the overarching story. Each episode had consequences that affected the story and the characters moving forward. This show was truly a narrative, with each of the 53 episodes being part of one cohesive story. And it stayed together so well because Michael Schur and his team planned almost everything out in advance, including the first season. This was a rarity, as most shows don't completely flesh out their first season in advance. But it's a good thing they did, because the premise can seem a bit insane on paper. 4 humans are told they're in the good place, but are secretly being tortured by a demon. So it's this planning that was crucial in securing the show's survival past season 1, and it was also this kind of preparation that helped keep the show on track through the rest of its run. Now, of course, you need interesting characters to carry out an ambitious show such as this one. There are 4 humans, Eleanor, Tahani, Jason, and Chidi, a demon named Michael, and a not a girl, not a robot assistant named Janet. All the humans are flawed in their own personal ways. Chidi can't make a decision, Eleanor was an all-around not nice person, Tahani is self-centered, and Jason is from Florida. And on the other side, you have a demon Michael, who literally tortures people, and Janet, a non-feeling, all-knowing vessel of knowledge. This gives the show the distinction of not having a real protagonist at first. All of these characters are bad people, we are told this. So as a viewer, this gives us a unique perspective. We're watching to see what happens to these characters without having a bias as to whether the outcome is good or bad for them. While fun to begin with, this needed to change if the audience were to continue watching. We needed to become invested in the fate of these characters. This is where the character development took center stage. Watching these 4 imperfect humans navigate their way through the afterlife while learning to be better people is extremely satisfying. Even though it's taking place in a magical land where shrimp dispensaries exist, it always feels grounded in its lessons. That's because the characters remain human throughout the show. Even though they are learning to be better while in the afterlife, they become better people. People being the main word, because humanity and human emotion is the core of what makes these characters so likable and charming. It's what makes Michael, an actual demon, become a better person. Even Janet learns to be human, having to start from the ground up since she's never had any human emotions before. And as she learns to be more human, she becomes more confused and things go wrong in her programming. She's no longer perfect, because being human isn't that simple, which is the entire premise of the show. I can go on for 20 minutes about Michael and Janet alone just because of how complex and well handled their characters are, but for now, it's time to look at the magical land that is The Good Place. This show is the setting. It is about the good place, the afterlife, and what takes place there. All the hijinks in the show, the creatures and items, the places that are visited, are all possible because they take place in a concept. a concept completely made up by the writers and creators of the show. They had free reign to create whatever they wanted because they created the rules of a world that nobody had any previous experience with. The setting is what drives the characters forward. Their end goal is to get to the real good place. Everything they do is in pursuit of that, and that makes the setting absolutely necessary to the story. Without the good place, there is no show. Change any other element you want, the characters, the antagonist, the plot. Change all that and the show can still run, but change the setting and the show ceases to work. That's because the setting is the characters, it is the antagonist, and it is the plot. Take away the good place, the afterlife setting, and these elements just don't work. How are you going to have a show about a group of dead people trying to get into the good place if you never actually show the good place? Leave everything the same but change the setting to Earth, and I'd be willing to bet that show doesn't make it past season 1. Because for a show about dead people, you need to show a unique place they go when they die. What's there? What happens there? Who else is there? These are the questions The Good Place answers in the classic show don't tell technique. The Good Place is a character. It is alive and changing with the other characters as they change with it. And when those characters eventually achieve their goal of reaching the good place, their journeys come to a natural end. This ending is really beautiful and brings everything full circle. For a show that answered question after question, it managed to leave us with the same initial question we began with. What happens after we die? It's a question that not even the all-knowing Janet can answer. And for me personally, this ending answered the question that I couldn't help but ponder while watching the show. And that was, how were they going to make an emotional goodbye for characters that were at the literal edge of existence? In other words, what emotional stakes are there for characters that are already dead and in heaven? The answer? Create a way for the characters to die again. The door was absolutely brilliant. A door that gave the characters the power of choice. The choice of when to walk through and end their journey in the universe. It was ambiguous enough to where we don't know exactly what happens when the characters walk through, but at the same time we know that they go back into the universe in some way. A happy ending that leaves some space for interpretation. Perfect. And we also get Michael's perfect ending, becoming a human and living on Earth. Once a demon, trying his best to learn how to be a good person, now an actual person, living out the best life he can. The show truly came full circle for these characters, in a finale that was pitch perfect. And now NBC looks to the future, to nurture new shows such as Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist and Perfect Harmony, and to finish strong with its long-running shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I look forward to what NBC will offer up in the future. They have proved to be experts when it comes to making hit sitcoms. The 3 shows I just went over are incredibly addicting and have fantastic rewatch value. You catch something new on each viewing, and the story and characters just never seem to lose their appeal. I think they're the leading examples of what a sitcom should be. So again, if you haven't watched any of these shows, please do yourself a favor and go watch them. And now, with all the wisdom and knowledge I have gained from these shows, I'll leave you with a line from one of the smartest beings in the universe.
Take it sleazy.